A silent stone giant stares from a remote Pacific shore. This is Easter Island, home to one of history's most stubborn secrets. Carved not into rock, but into weathered wood, lies an entire language that no living person can read. This is the Rongorongo script. By the end of this journey, you will understand why this cryptic code has defied every expert for over a century and a half. We will uncover how it was found in a moment of tragic irony and explore the startling theory that these glyphs might chart the cycles of the moon. What does it take for a civilization's voice to be lost forever, and what would it mean to finally hear it again? That isolation is almost impossible to comprehend. Imagine being born on a speck of land in the middle of an ocean so vast it feels like another planet. The nearest continental shore, South America, lies more than 2,000 miles to the east. To the west, it is another 1,200 miles to the nearest significant island group. For centuries, this was the world of the Rapanui people, a world defined entirely by the horizon. Yet within this breathtaking isolation, they achieved something monumental, quite literally. You have seen the moe, those immense stone figures with their solemn, elongated faces. They are more than just heads, they are full-bodied statues, some weighing over 80 tons, carved from solid volcanic rock and transported miles across the island without wheels, without large animals, using only human ingenuity, ropes, and sheer will. This was not the work of a simple or primitive culture. It was the signature of a sophisticated society with a deep spiritual life, complex social hierarchies, and masterful engineers. Which makes the historical silence that followed all the more deafening. For a long time, Western scholars looked at this incredible feat and asked a logical but ultimately flawed question. If they were so advanced, where is their writing? Great civilizations, from the Maya to the Egyptians, left behind texts. The absence of any written record on Rapa Nui seemed to tell a story of a people who mastered stone but never developed a script. It was a puzzle that painted them as magnificent yet mysteriously incomplete. But what if that very assumption was wrong? What if the writing was there all along, waiting in plain sight, but on a material far more fragile than stone? This is the perfect moment for a revelation that changes everything, because they did have a system of symbols. We just could not read it. The silence was broken in 1864, not by an archaeologist's shovel, but by a gesture of faith. A Rapa Nui man, recently converted to Christianity, wanted to give his bishop a special gift. The man's name is lost to us, but his offering remains. He presented Bishop Florentin Etienne Jawson, the Catholic bishop of Tahiti, with a length of dark wood about the size of a man's forearm. It was not just a simple carving. Its entire surface, front and back, was covered from edge to edge in a dense, orderly forest of tiny, intricate symbols. Birds with curved beaks, frigate birds in flight, strange human figures with their arms raised, geometric shapes and forms that seemed part plant, part creature. They were arranged in neat, alternating lines, a system so deliberate it could only be one thing: a script, a written language from the most isolated island on Earth. Imagine Bishop Jawson's astonishment. Here was physical proof that contradicted every scholarly assumption of the day. This was not random decoration. The symbols repeated, they followed sequences, they had a clear direction, written in a method called reverse boustrafedon. That is a technical term for a very simple idea. Picture a farmer plowing a field. He goes left to right on one row, then turns around and goes right to left on the next, his oxen always moving forward. That is exactly how these glyphs were arranged. One line reads left to right. The next line is physically upside down and reads right to left. This was the work of sophisticated scribes, not casual artists. The bishop immediately understood its significance. He was holding a document, but he could not read a single word. He sent urgent messages back to the island, asking for more tablets and, crucially, for someone who could explain them. He promised rewards, he pleaded for translations, and this is where the story turns from discovery to profound tragedy. Because at that very moment, while Bishop Jawson was trying to preserve this knowledge, the people who created it were being systematically erased. Throughout the 1860s, Peruvian slave raiders were descending on Easter Island. They came in ships, rounding up men, women, and even children, kidnapping them to work in brutal conditions in Peru's guano mines and plantations. These raids were catastrophic. In just a few years, they captured or killed nearly half the island's population, including, almost certainly, the last of the learned men. These were the Tangata Rongorongo, the men who could read the sacred tablets. They were the living libraries of their culture. When they were taken, the chain of knowledge was severed forever. So picture the cruel, heartbreaking irony of that moment. The first Rongorongo tablet arrives in the hands of a European scholar just as the final masters of the script are being dragged away in chains. A door to an ancient mind was discovered and then immediately permanently slammed shut. The wood survived, the meaning did not. The tablet Bishop Jawson received was a physical map to a lost world of thought. To understand its challenge, we need to look closely at what was actually carved into that wood. The Rongorongo glyphs are not chaotic scratches. They are a refined set of pictographic symbols, each one a tiny, elegant piece of art. You will see stylized human figures, often in a crouching or dancing pose with their arms raised, as if in ceremony or supplication. You will see birds everywhere, especially the distinctive frigate bird with its long, hooked beak and forked tail, a creature of immense cultural significance across Polynesia. There are fish with detailed fins, probable representations of palm trees or other plants, and a variety of geometric shapes, crescents, and intricate designs that might represent tools, canoes, or celestial bodies. Each glyph is cleanly incised, and they are arranged with remarkable discipline into straight, parallel lines that cover the tablet completely. But the true genius, and the primary reason this script is so difficult to decipher, lies in how you are supposed to read it. This is not a simple left-to-right page like a modern book. The system is called reverse boustrophedon. Let us break down that intimidating word into a simple mental image. Think of the way your eyes move when you read a page. You start at the top left, read to the right, then drop down to the next line and start again at the left. Now imagine instead that when you finish that first line, you do not go down. You physically flip the entire tablet 180 degrees, turning it upside down. Now the next line of text is right there in front of you, but it is oriented the opposite way. You read that line from what was the right edge, moving toward what was the left. When you finish that line, you flip the tablet again, returning it to its original orientation to read the third line, which runs left to right just like the first. The text flows in a continuous, snaking pattern across the surface, like a serpent weaving back and forth. This was a sophisticated space-saving technique, allowing scribes to pack an incredible amount of information onto a precious piece of wood. For a modern reader, however, it presents a dizzying puzzle. Your brain must constantly reorient, not just to the meaning of the symbols, but to their very direction. It is a testament to the skill of the Rongorongo scribes, who could not only carve these minute figures with precision, but also mentally navigate this complex textual labyrinth. So we have the symbols and we understand their physical arrangement. The monumental question that follows is perhaps the most haunting of all. What were these beautiful, meticulously arranged tablets actually saying? That single gifted tablet was merely the beginning of a desperate global scavenger hunt. Today, after more than a century and a half of searching, the entire physical library of the Rongorongo script amounts to a heartbreakingly small collection. Scattered across the world in museum vaults, there are only about 25 surviving objects that bear these sacred glyphs. Most of these precious artifacts are not on Easter Island itself. You will find them in institutions like the Vatican's Ethnological Museum, the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C., and museums in London, Berlin, and Brussels. Each piece was traded, sold, or taken during a time when its true value was not understood, becoming a fragment of a puzzle spread across the globe. The material they are made from tells its own story of scarcity and ingenuity. Easter Island, after centuries of settlement, was largely deforested. Large trees were incredibly rare, so the scribes used what they could find. Most tablets are carved on dark, seasoned wood from driftwood that had washed ashore from distant shores or from the scarce native Toromero tree. But a few remarkable exceptions push the boundaries of their craft. There is a stone statuette with glyphs etched around its base, and perhaps most astonishing, a ceremonial breast ornament, a pectoral, carved from a single piece of whalebone. The effort to incise such precise, tiny symbols into a material as hard as bone speaks to the profound importance of the text it carried. Among these few survivors, two artifacts stand out as keystones for every decipherment attempt. The first is known as the Santiago Staff. It is not a tablet at all, but a long, wooden scepter over 4 feet in length, completely covered in glyphs from end to end. It resembles a chief's staff of office, and its continuous text, the longest single Rongorongo inscription known, might have recorded a lineage, a treaty, or an epic history. The second is the Mamari Tablet. To the untrained eye, it looks similar to the others, but researchers have noticed something peculiar about its symbols. It contains sequences that seem to chart a very specific repeating pattern. Many scholars now believe the Mamari Tablet is not a historical narrative, but a technical document, possibly a complex lunar calendar. It could be a manual for tracking the phases of the moon, regulating rituals and planting cycles, a celestial map carved in wood. Each of these 25 objects is irreplaceable. They are fragile, often cracked, the wood threatened by age and climate. They are the last physical voices of a literary tradition, and every chip, every faded line, represents a word or a concept that may be gone forever. With so few pieces to study, every mark becomes monumental evidence. So the question becomes, with this tiny, scattered corpus, how does anyone even begin to try and crack the code? The very definition of writing is the first battleground in this mystery. What separates a shopping list from a poem or a set of road signs from a novel? Linguists draw a critical line. For a system to be considered true writing, it must do more than just convey ideas. It must directly represent the sounds, the syllables, or the words of a spoken language. It is a visual echo of speech. This is the core of the great Rongorongo debate, and it splits experts into two passionate camps. On one side are the skeptics. They look at these beautiful tablets and propose a compelling alternative. What if Rongorongo is not a full script but something called proto-writing? Think of medieval coats of arms. A lion on a shield does not spell out the word lion. It symbolizes a family's courage and lineage. Or consider a priest using a knotted cord or a marked stick to remember the key points of a long ceremonial chant. The symbols are memory aids, not a direct record of language. The skeptics suggest Rongorongo might have served a similar purpose for the island's elite. The tablets could be sacred iconography, ritual checklists for ceremonies, or symbolic genealogies where a frigate bird glyph stands for a whole clan rather than a specific word for bird. This view paints the scribes not as authors but as master curators of a visual tradition. The other side, the proponents of Rongorongo as true writing, point to the evidence carved into the wood itself. They argue this is far too organized to be simple picture-keeping. The glyphs appear in a strict, linear sequence, one after the other, just like words in a sentence. There is a limited, consistent repertoire of several hundred distinct signs, which aligns with the size of a syllabary, a system where each symbol stands for a syllable like ba or ko. Most intriguingly, researchers have identified what look like compound signs. These are glyphs where two basic elements, like a bird and a fish, are fused into a single new character. This is a hallmark of mature writing systems where symbols can be combined to create new meaning, much like an Egyptian hieroglyph could be used for its sound, its meaning, or as part of a larger word. To understand the scale of this puzzle, we can place it beside other famous undeciphered scripts. The cryptic symbols of the Indus Valley civilization, etched onto seals thousands of years old, remain silent. The linear, a script of ancient Crete which preceded the deciphered linear B, still guards its secrets. Rongorongo sits in this elite, frustrating club. But unlike those ancient systems, Rongorongo's story was interrupted not by millennia, but by a few brutal years in the 1860s. The possibility that it could be true writing makes its loss feel not just ancient but acutely modern, a library burned within living memory. This debate is not just academic. If the proponents are right, then Easter Island did not just produce stone giants, it produced literature. And that changes everything we thought we knew about the Pacific's most isolated culture. The legends of the Rapanui people offer a flickering candle in the dark. While the physical tablets sit silent in their museum cases, echoes of their purpose have been passed down through generations in oral histories. These stories provide our most direct and most poetic link to the script's original world. Central to this is the founding epic of Hotu Matar, the great Polynesian navigator and first king of Easter Island. The legend tells that he did not arrive on those shores alone or empty-handed. He came with a sacred cargo, 67 wooden tablets inscribed with all the knowledge of the ancestral homeland. This was not a random number. It implies a complete library, a foundational archive meant to establish law, genealogy, and ritual for the new society. The very name given to these objects whispers their function. They are called Kohau Rongorongo. Kohau means lines or incisions. Rongorongo is more complex, but its root is tied to the word to recite or to chant. So a direct translation is not sacred writing but something far more active, lines for chanting out or lines of recitation. This is a monumental clue. It suggests the tablets were not meant for silent, private study. They were scripts for performance. A learned man, a Tangata Rongorongo, would look at these lines of symbols and use them to prompt the recitation of vast, memorized texts, perhaps genealogies that stretched back to the gods, creation chants that told of the world's birth, or navigational lore that charted the stars. The glyphs themselves might not spell out every single word phonetically. Instead, they could act as a sophisticated mnemonic system, where each beautifully carved figure triggers a whole stanza of sacred speech in the reciter's mind. Think of a modern musician looking at a sheet of music. The notes on the page are not the sound itself, but a coded instruction that releases a memorized melody from the performer's training. The Kohau Rongorongo may have worked in a similar way, where the visual symbol of a frigate bird in flight cues a specific passage about an ancestor's voyage. This bridges the gap between the skeptics and the proponents. It suggests the script was both a memory aid and a true linguistic tool, intimately bound to the spoken word and to the ritual heartbeat of the culture. The wood did not just hold writing, it held a voice waiting to be spoken aloud. This understanding shifts the entire search. Decipherment is no longer just about translating symbols into words, but about hearing the chant hidden within the silence. The idea of a script meant for chanting leads us to a chilling possibility. What if the silence surrounding Rongorongo was not just a tragic accident, but in some ways a deliberate choice? This is the forbidden knowledge theory, a darker layer to the mystery that suggests the script may have been lost on purpose. To understand this, we must look at the social structure of pre-contact Rapa Nui society. It was a culture deeply stratified, governed by a powerful class of chiefs and priests. Knowledge was not a public commodity. It was power, and it was guarded with immense secrecy. The men who could read the tablets, the Tangata Rongorongo, were not simply scribes. They were the Maori, the experts, a priestly caste who held a monopoly on sacred information. These tablets were not books you could borrow. They were tapu, a Polynesian concept meaning sacred, forbidden, and set apart. To handle them without the proper status and ritual preparation would have been unthinkable, a violation with serious spiritual consequences. The knowledge they contained was the operating system for the entire civilization, dictating rituals, land rites, genealogies, and astronomical cycles. It was the source code, and only a few were allowed to see it. Then the outside world crashed upon the shore. European ships brought more than just curious explorers. They brought diseases like smallpox and tuberculosis, against which the islanders had no immunity. Waves of illness swept through the population. Then came the slave raiders, specifically targeting able-bodied men and leaders. It is a devastating historical pattern. The very people most likely to be taken or killed first in such a raid are the elite, the warriors, and the learned men. The priestly caste, the living keys to the Rongorongo script, would have been decimated. In the face of this apocalyptic collapse, a profound cultural trauma unfolded. The surviving elders, seeing their world ending, faced an impossible decision. The sacred knowledge was now a burden. There were no new apprentices of the proper lineage to teach, and the old rituals that gave the tablets meaning were crumbling. In such a context, passing on the deepest secrets might have been seen as pointless or even dangerous. Some researchers speculate that the remaining experts chose to let the knowledge die with them, to bury it honorably rather than see it profaned or fall into the wrong hands. The tablets themselves, as sacred objects, may have been hidden away in caves or buried, not to preserve them for the future, but to ritually retire them from a world that could no longer understand their power. This act of concealment, born from despair and reverence, is the final cruel irony. It is likely what physically saved the few tablets we have from being burned as fuel or simply rotting away. They were placed in a kind of sacred quarantine, but by hiding them to protect their sanctity, the last gatekeepers also ensured that the meaning within them was entombed forever. The wood survived because it was made forbidden, and it became unreadable for the very same reason. So we are left with a haunting question. Are we looking at a library that was burned, or one that was quietly, solemnly locked from the inside? Bishop Jawson's first hopeful inquiries quickly spiraled into frustration. He had the artifact, but he needed a key. He wrote letters to other missionaries across the Pacific, asking if anyone had seen similar markings. He sent a copy of the glyphs to experts in Europe, hoping a linguist or historian might recognize the system. The replies were uniformly disappointing. No one had seen anything like it. The bishop even tried a direct approach with the few Rapanui people he could find who had survived the slave raids and returned to the island. He showed them the tablet, asking for a translation. The results were baffling. One man began to chant a genealogy, but his recitation bore no clear, one-to-one relationship to the specific glyphs on the wood. Another simply said the knowledge was gone, that the men who knew were dead. Jawson was left with a profound realization. He was not just dealing with a foreign language, he was confronting a complete intellectual blackout. The living bridge between the symbols and their meaning had collapsed. This set the stage for over a century of well-intentioned but deeply flawed attempts to force the script to speak. The first wave of decipherers approached Rongorongo with the tools they knew, which was part of the problem. They assumed it must be related to some other known writing system. The most famous and most spectacularly wrong of these early theories came from a Hungarian scholar named Wilhelm von Hevesy. In 1932, von Hevesy published a paper that sent shockwaves through the small world of script enthusiasts. He claimed he had found a direct link between the glyphs of Easter Island and the ancient, undeciphered script of the Indus Valley civilization, from the other side of the world in modern-day Pakistan and India. He presented side-by-side comparisons, pointing to symbols that looked vaguely similar, a bird-like shape here, a geometric pattern there. The academic world was briefly captivated by the romantic idea of a lost global connection, a prehistoric cultural bridge spanning the Indian and Pacific Oceans. But the theory crumbled under scrutiny. The similarities were superficial, based on a handful of cherry-picked glyphs while ignoring the vast differences in the overall systems, the time gap of thousands of years, and the complete lack of any historical or archaeological evidence for contact. Von Hevesey's work is now largely remembered as a cautionary tale in the field, a classic example of what scholars call pseudoscience. These early efforts were doomed by more than just wild guesses. They operated under severe, almost crippling limitations. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, a researcher in Europe might have access to only a single, poorly drawn sketch of one tablet. High-quality photographs were rare. They had no comprehensive catalogue of all the glyphs, no way to easily compare sequences across different artifacts. Perhaps the most fundamental handicap was linguistic. Western scholars had only a rudimentary understanding of the Rapanui language at the time, and they often tried to force the glyphs to match words from other Polynesian tongues or, worse, languages from entirely different families. They were trying to solve a puzzle without all the pieces, and worse, they were trying to solve it in the dark without a clear picture of what the finished image was even supposed to be. The assumption that Rongorongo must be a cousin to another known script created a kind of intellectual prison. Every attempt started with a preconceived answer, looking for evidence to fit the theory rather than letting the glyphs themselves suggest a path forward. It was a century of false starts, where the loudest voices were often the ones who understood the problem the least. The false starts and grand theories of the early 20th century had left the field in disarray. It was a scholar from an entirely different world, operating under the shadow of the Cold War, who would finally bring a new kind of discipline to the mystery. His name was Yuri Norizov. If that name sounds familiar, it is because he is a legend in the history of decipherment. In the 1950s, working from photographs in a Soviet library, Norizov achieved the impossible. He cracked the foundational code of the ancient Maya script, proving it was a fully functional writing system. His method was not based on romantic guesses or visual similarities. It was rooted in cold, hard statistics. He treated the unknown glyphs as data, and after his monumental success with the Maya, he turned his analytical gaze toward the other great unsolved script of the world, the glyphs of Easter Island. Norizov approached Rongorongo not as a riddle to be intuited, but as a mathematical puzzle to be solved. He began with the most basic question possible. What are the raw materials of this script? He and his team meticulously catalogued every single glyph on the available tablets. They counted them. They created vast frequency lists. How many times does the frigate bird appear? How often does the crouching man figure show up? This was more than just tallying. By analyzing these frequencies and, crucially, the positions of the glyphs within lines, Norizov began to search for patterns invisible to the naked eye. In any language, certain types of words behave in predictable ways. For example, in English, the word that appears very frequently and almost always at the beginning of a noun phrase. By looking for glyphs that appeared with overwhelming frequency or that consistently occupied the first position in a sequence, Norizov hoped to identify similar structural markers, the grammatical skeleton of the language. He was looking for potential articles, prepositions, or verb endings. His statistical work led him to a specific and highly respected hypothesis. Norizov concluded that Rongorongo was likely what linguists call a mixed logographic syllabic system. This is a mouthful, but the concept is powerful. In such a system, some glyphs function as logograms. They represent whole words or concepts, like a drawing of a bird meaning the word bird or the name of a specific clan. Other glyphs would function as syllabograms, representing not a meaning, but a sound, a syllable like pa or ko. These sound-based signs could then be used to spell out words that were hard to depict with a simple picture, like verbs or abstract ideas. This is exactly how the Maya system worked, and it is a hallmark of sophisticated, mature writing. Norizov's proposal was a seismic shift. It moved the discussion away from questions of if it was writing and into the concrete realm of what kind of writing it might be. He brought a sorely needed rigor to the field, treating the tablets with the same seriousness as a Mayan stela or an Egyptian papyrus. Yet, for all its brilliance, the statistical approach hit a wall of silence. Norizov could map the potential grammar. He could suggest which glyphs might be nouns and which might be verbs based on their placement, but statistics alone cannot tell you what a single word actually means. To move from structure to translation, you need what decipherers call a Rosetta Stone, a bilingual text that anchors the unknown symbols to a known language. For the Maya, Norizov had the help of Spanish colonial dictionaries that recorded Mayan words. For Rongorongo, no such key exists. There is no tablet with a parallel translation in Rapanui and Spanish. There is no handy phrasebook left behind by a missionary. So while Norizov could describe the machine's probable inner workings, he could not make it produce a single, verifiable sentence. His work narrowed the path forward immensely, proving the script's complexity and likely structure, but the final step, the act of hearing the words themselves, remained out of reach. The mystery now had a shape, but it still had no voice. The statistical maps left by Norizov needed a legend, a way to assign sound and meaning to the patterns. That potential key arrived not from a new archaeological dig, but from an old notebook. In the late 19th century, as the Rapa Nui population was struggling to recover, a handful of ethnographers managed to record fragments of the island's oral tradition. Among these was a long, rhythmic creation chant, a genealogy of the world that traced everything back to the mating of primordial beings. This chant was not connected to any tablet at the time. It was simply a piece of recorded speech, a snapshot of the Rapa Nui language in its poetic, ceremonial form. For decades, this chant sat in an archive, a beautiful piece of folklore. Then, in the 1990s, linguist Stephen Roger Fisher picked it up and looked at it with a new, electrifying question. What if this was not just a random chant? What if it was the literal text of a Rongorongo inscription? Fisher focused his attention on one specific artifact, the Santiago Staff. This long wooden scepter, covered from end to end in glyphs, had always been considered a prime candidate for a continuous narrative. Fisher's method was a bold synthesis. He took the recorded creation chant, which had a very clear, repetitive structure built on parallel phrases and refrains, and he laid it alongside the sequence of glyphs on the staff. His hypothesis was straightforward. If the staff recorded this chant, then the repeating linguistic patterns in the chant should correspond to repeating visual patterns in the glyphs. He began looking for sequences of symbols that appeared over and over again in the same order, just as key phrases repeat in a song or a poem, and he believed he found them. One particular glyph cluster, a sequence that appeared multiple times on the staff, became the centerpiece of his theory. This cluster often began with a distinctive glyph that looks like two skeletal, stylized figures joined together. Fisher proposed this glyph was a logogram representing the phrase "the copulating couple," the primordial pair from the creation myth. The repeated appearance of this glyph cluster, in his view, marked the refrain of the chant, each instance introducing a new generation born from this ancestral union. This was not a full decipherment of the entire script, but it was a proposed decipherment of a specific, meaningful phrase within a specific text. Fisher argued he had found a direct link between a known Rapa Nui utterance and a sequence of Rongorongo glyphs. He published his findings, suggesting the Santiago Staff was essentially a written version of the creation chant, a sacred genealogy carved in wood. For a moment, it felt like the breakthrough the world had been waiting for. Headlines proclaimed the mystery of Easter Island's script was solved. Yet, within the small, specialized community of linguists and Rapa Nui scholars, Fisher's conclusions met with immediate and intense skepticism. The criticisms were methodological. Critics argued that the structure of the chant was too generic, that finding some repetition in a long glyph sequence was statistically probable even by chance. They pointed out that the ethnographer who recorded the chant in the late 1800s did not connect it to any tablet, and the Rapanui informant did not claim it was written. The link, they said, was speculative, an elegant theory built on a fragile chain of assumptions. The glyph he translated as the copulating couple could, others contended, represent any number of dualities, a chief and his priest, the sky and the earth, or simply be a compound sign with a completely different meaning. Fisher's work was a landmark, not for providing a definitive translation, but for demonstrating a rigorous new approach. He showed how a known Rapa Nui text could be used to test hypotheses against the glyphs, moving beyond pure statistics into the realm of linguistic content. Even his critics acknowledged he had raised the bar, forcing the conversation to focus on verifiable links between symbol and spoken word. His theory remains controversial, unproven, and ultimately unverified. But it stands as the most compelling modern attempt to make the silent would speak a complete, recognizable sentence. It gave us a glimpse of what a translation might look and sound like, a whisper of meaning in the overwhelming silence. Fisher's controversial work on the Santiago Staff opened a door, but it was not the only one. Another tablet, the Mamari, suggests the scribes of Rapa Nui were not just recording chants but mapping the heavens themselves. This is the lunar calendar hypothesis, and it offers a different kind of key, one based on rhythm and repetition rather than specific words. If the Mamari tablet is a calendar, then we are not looking for a story, we are looking at a clock. The evidence begins with a simple, powerful observation. On one of the tablet's lines, researchers have identified a sequence of exactly 29 distinct glyphs grouped together. On another, they see a sequence of 30. This is not a random number. A lunar month, the time from one new moon to the next, averages about 29.5 days. Ancient calendars the world over dealt with this fraction by alternating between 29 and 30-day months. So here, carved in wood, we may have the most fundamental unit of timekeeping, the month, laid out in a visual chain. But the evidence goes deeper than just counting glyphs. Look closely at the symbols within these sequences. Among the human figures and birds, you find glyphs that look strikingly like celestial bodies. There are clear crescent shapes which could represent the waxing or waning moon. There are glyphs that resemble a circle or a disk, possibly a full moon. There are even symbols that look like a star or a sun. The arrangement is not chaotic. These celestial glyphs appear at what could be significant points within the 29 or 30 glyph sequences, perhaps marking the quarters of the moon or important ritual days. This theory connects powerfully to the wider Polynesian world. Navigation across the vast Pacific was an astronomical science. The great voyagers who settled islands from Hawaii to New Zealand used a sophisticated lunar calendar, known as the night calendar, to track seasons, planting, fishing, and sacred ceremonies. Each night of the lunar cycle had a name, often associated with specific activities or prohibitions. The 29th night might be for rest, the 30th for preparation. It is a system built on deep, observed harmony with the natural world. The Mamari Tablet could be Rapa Nui's unique expression of this shared knowledge, a local adaptation carved for an isolated island's specific needs. A team from the University of Bologna has taken this hypothesis into the digital age. Using advanced software, they have created a virtual model of the tablet, mapping every glyph and its position. They then began testing calendrical models against it, searching for patterns that repeat not just in one line, but across the entire tablet's reverse Boustrophedon structure. Imagine the tablet not as a page in a book, but as a continuous, snaking timeline. Their work suggests the Mamari could track more than just months. It might encode a longer lunisolar cycle, reconciling the lunar months with the solar year to keep seasonal ceremonies in their proper place. This would be a complex mathematical achievement, a hidden engine of order within the beautiful symbols. If this hypothesis is correct, the Mamari Tablet is more than a calendar. It is a cosmological machine. It tells us that the people who stared up from the world's most isolated island did not just see random stars, they saw a clockwork universe, and they found a way to carve its ticking into wood. The silence of Rongorongo in this light is not just the loss of stories, but the loss of an entire way of marking time, of knowing when to plant, when to harvest, when to call upon the gods. To decipher it would be to recover not just words, but the very rhythm of a vanished world. The silent wood of the tablets holds a language that is not entirely lost. Modern Rapanui is spoken today, a living tongue that belongs to the vast Polynesian language family. This is our most vital clue. The words that once matched these glyphs are cousins to the Maori of New Zealand, the Hawaiian of the Pacific Islands, and the Tahitian of the Society Islands. Any realistic attempt to decipher Rongorongo must be rooted in this linguistic soil. It is the only family tree we have for the script's vocabulary. Researchers have long tried to use this connection to identify basic glyphs. Look at a symbol that clearly resembles a fish. In nearly all Polynesian languages, the word for fish is some variation of ika. Could that simple, fish-shaped glyph be a logogram for the Rapanui word ika? Similarly, a beautifully carved frigatebird glyph might correspond to the widespread Polynesian word monu, meaning bird. This approach seems beautifully straightforward. Find the picture, match it to the common word, but the reality of language, especially on an island isolated for centuries, is far more complex. Think of English as it was spoken in the time of Chaucer over 600 years ago. A modern English speaker can recognize some words and structures, but much of it sounds foreign, even alien. The Rapanui language experienced a similar, profound evolution. After the initial settlement, Easter Island was cut off from the rest of Polynesia for perhaps 800 years. Its language drifted on its own unique current, changing sounds, inventing new words, and forgetting old ones. The language recorded on the Rongorongo tablets, if it is writing, would likely represent an archaic, ceremonial form of Rapanui. It would be the language of priests and chants, frozen in time around the 17th or 18th century, before European contact scrambled everything. This creates a daunting gap. The modern Rapanui words we know today might be distant echoes of the words carved into the wood. The glyph for ika, fish, might not have been pronounced ika at all in the ritual language. It could have been an older form, or the symbol might have represented a more specific, sacred type of fish lost to history. This turns a simple matching game into a historical linguistics puzzle. We are not just looking for a translation, we are attempting to reconstruct a lost dialect using a script we cannot read as our only guide. It is a circular problem of immense difficulty. Yet, this Polynesian connection remains the only viable path forward. By comparing the structure of known Polynesian chants, their poetic parallelisms and refrains, to the repeating patterns in the glyphs, linguists can test hypotheses. They can ask if a certain sequence of symbols fits the grammatical pattern of a Polynesian sentence. They can look for glyphs that might serve as grammatical markers, particles that indicate possession or tense, which are crucial in Polynesian languages. The connection does not provide easy answers, but it provides essential boundaries. It tells us the search must happen within this specific linguistic universe, a universe of ocean voyages, shared ancestors, and words that have traveled across thousands of miles of open sea only to be locked silently in a piece of driftwood on the world's most remote shore. This gap between modern language and ancient script is precisely where a new kind of explorer has entered the field. The silent tablets are now speaking to computers. In research labs from Italy to Chile, the most advanced tools of the digital age are being trained on these ancient wooden surfaces, not to replace human intuition, but to amplify it beyond natural limits. The first breakthrough came from a simple yet profound shift in perspective. Instead of studying photographs or drawings, researchers began creating perfect, three-dimensional digital twins of the artifacts. Using high-resolution structured light scanners, they capture every square millimeter of a tablet's surface. The resulting model can be rotated, lit from any angle, and zoomed into with microscopic precision. This digital lens reveals a hidden world of craftsmanship. Suddenly, you can see the individual tool marks left by the scribe's obsidian or shark-tooth chisel. You can trace the depth and direction of each stroke, discerning which lines were carved with confidence in a single pass and which were tentative or reworked. Most importantly, this technology can strip away centuries of wear. By digitally filtering out the natural cracks, stains, and erosion of the wood, researchers can often recover the original, crisp outline of a glyph that appears blurred or broken to the naked eye. It is like cleaning a dusty window to see a masterpiece clearly for the first time. The computer does not interpret the symbol, it simply gives us the cleanest possible canvas on which to look. But the digital revolution goes far beyond creating better pictures. This is where computational linguistics enters the story. Once a tablet is fully digitized, every glyph is tagged and cataloged into a vast database. Software can then analyze these sequences at a speed and scale no human could ever match. The algorithms search for patterns invisible to our brains. They look for recurring combinations of 2, 3, or 4 glyphs that might form common words or phrases. They analyze the statistical distribution of symbols, identifying which ones almost always appear at the beginning of a line, which cluster together in the middle, and which act as potential punctuation at the end. This is not guesswork, it is a mathematical autopsy of the script structure. Some projects are even employing machine learning techniques. By feeding the software known properties of other writing systems, both deciphered and undeciphered, the algorithms can be asked to search for similar structural fingerprints in the Rongorongo data. Does it share syntactic rhythms with early Greek? Does its glyph distribution resemble the pattern of logograms in ancient Chinese? The computer can run millions of comparisons in seconds, highlighting potential parallels for human experts to then explore in depth. Yet, for all their processing power, these machines face the same fundamental wall that halted Norizov and Fisher. They suffer from the Rosetta Stone problem in digital form. A computer can identify that a specific glyph sequence repeats 37 times across all known tablets. That is a monumental discovery, but it cannot tell you what that sequence means. Without a bilingual key, a single anchor point where a string of glyphs is definitively linked to a known phrase in Rapanui, the algorithms are mapping a ghost. They can draw a breathtakingly detailed blueprint of a house, but they cannot tell you who lived inside, what songs they sang, or what stories they told by the fire. The technology provides unprecedented clarity on the questions we can ask, but the most profound answer, the meaning itself, still requires a human spark, a hypothesis born from cultural understanding and linguistic insight to test against the mountain of data. The machines are giving us the sharpest tools we have ever had to examine the lock, but a key must still be fashioned by hand. That missing key is the ghost haunting every attempt to understand Rongorongo. It is called the crib or the bilingual text, and its absence is the single greatest reason these symbols remain silent. To grasp why this is so devastating, we need to understand how the world's other great linguistic puzzles were finally solved. The most famous example is the Rosetta Stone, discovered in Egypt in 1799. It is a slab of black granite with the same decree carved 3 times in 3 different scripts: ancient Greek, Demotic Egyptian, and Egyptian hieroglyphs. Scholars of the time could read ancient Greek fluently. That known text became the perfect crib, a translation guide that allowed them to painstakingly match the known Greek words and names like Ptolemy and Alexander to their corresponding clusters of hieroglyphs. It was not a magic key that unlocked everything at once, but it provided the essential foothold, the first verified meanings from which the entire system could be slowly reconstructed. The same principle worked for cuneiform, the wedge-shaped writing of ancient Mesopotamia. The Behistun inscription, carved high on a cliff face in Iran, presented the same text in 3 languages: Old Persian, Elamite, and Babylonian. Because Old Persian was already partially understood, it gave scholars the leverage to crack the other 2. These breakthroughs did not happen because someone was brilliantly intuitive. They happened because someone found a dictionary, a parallel text that acted as a linguistic bridge. For Rongorongo, no such bridge was ever built, or if it was, it has been lost to time. We have the tablets, but we have no Rosetta Stone for Easter Island. There is no piece of wood with a Rongorongo line followed by its translation into Spanish, Dutch, or Tahitian. No missionary or early visitor sat down with a scribe and carefully transcribed the meaning glyph by glyph. This leaves researchers in a desperate bind. The closest we have to a potential crib are those 19th century recordings of Rapanui chants and folklore, written down in the Latin alphabet by ethnographers. These are precious windows into the language and the oral tradition, but here lies the critical, frustrating gap. While linguists like Stephen Fisher can propose that a specific chant might match a specific tablet, there is no proof. No one from that time pointed to the Santiago Staff and said, "This wooden line here, it says exactly this chant I am about to sing for you." The connection is a hypothesis, an educated guess that fits a pattern, but it cannot be verified. Without that single, undeniable point of contact where a string of glyphs is definitively linked to a known phrase, every proposed decipherment floats in a sea of possibility. It could be right, it could be elegantly, persuasively wrong. The wall is not a lack of intelligence or technology, it is a fundamental absence of evidence. You can have the most powerful computer in the world map every pattern in the script, but without that one confirmed translation to anchor the data, the machine is solving for X in an equation with infinite variables. The meaning remains locked away, not for want of trying, but for want of a single, shared sentence. This absence of a definitive key creates a vacuum, and into that vacuum rush the strangest of theories. The history of Rongorongo research is littered with claims that sound more like science fiction than scholarship. There are those who insist the script is not Polynesian at all, but a message from ancient astronauts who visited the island, a cosmic visitor's log. Others have tried to link the bird glyphs to Egyptian hieroglyphs, proposing a lost Pacific colony of pharaohs. Then there is the persistent myth of the sunken continent of Mu, a Pacific Atlantis whose refugees supposedly brought the script to Easter Island as a relic of their drowned civilization. These ideas are captivating stories, but they share one fatal flaw. They are built on imagination, not evidence. They ignore the overwhelming archaeological and linguistic proof that the Rapanui people are Polynesians, whose ancestors sailed from the west in canoes, not from the stars in spaceships or from a continent that never existed. These sensational claims do more than just distract. They actively damage the slow, careful work of real research. They create noise that makes it harder for the public to hear the legitimate, if quieter, voices of science. They turn a profound historical mystery into a carnival sideshow where the most outlandish guess gets the loudest applause. This problem is not confined to outright fantasy. A more subtle but equally damaging issue comes from within the academic world itself. Every few years, a headline will blare that the Rongorongo script has finally been deciphered. A researcher, often working in isolation, will announce to the media that they have cracked the code, presenting translations of entire tablets. These announcements generate excitement and hope, but they almost always collapse under scrutiny. The critical step of peer review, where other experts in linguistics, archaeology, and Rapa Nui culture examine the methods and evidence, is skipped in the rush for publicity. When these claims are finally reviewed, the flaws become apparent. The proposed translations might rely on forced linguistic connections or ignore the statistical patterns established by other scholars. They are like someone claiming to have translated a French novel by using a Spanish dictionary and a lot of guesswork. The result is not a breakthrough but a setback. It creates confusion, sowing doubt about whether any progress is possible, and leading to a cynical public belief that all decipherment claims are just hype. This cycle of overstatement and disappointment makes the sober, cautious work of genuine scholarship seem unexciting by comparison. Why listen to a linguist describing a possible grammatical particle when someone else is promising the full epic of Hatu Mater? The truth is that real decipherment is not an event, it is a process. It is a collective, painstaking effort built on peer review, where every proposed glyph meaning is tested, challenged, and either supported or discarded by the community. It is a conversation, not a proclamation. This is why the most respected work on Rongorongo today is characterized by humility. Researchers present their findings as hypotheses, not final truth. They say the data suggests this sequence might be calendrical, or this glyph could potentially relate to a known Polynesian root. This cautious language is not a lack of confidence, it is intellectual honesty. It acknowledges the size of the gap between a compelling pattern and a confirmed translation. In a field with no Rosetta Stone, where a single mistake can send you down a path of beautiful, elaborate error, this disciplined restraint is the only way forward. It protects the script from being hijacked by fantasy and preserves the possibility that one day, with enough accumulated evidence, those silent lines of birds and men might truly begin to speak. The wood of the Rongorongo tablets is not the only surface on Easter Island that tells a story. To find the script's possible roots, you must leave the museum vault and climb the windswept slopes of the Rongorongo volcano. Here at the ceremonial village of Orongo, perched on the crater's dizzying edge, the story is carved in stone. Hundreds of petroglyphs cover the volcanic rock faces, a sprawling, open-air gallery of symbols. You will see the same iconic forms found on the tablets, but here they are monumental, public, and carved with a powerful, raw energy. The frigate bird is everywhere, often with a human figure in its grasp. The distinctive birdman motif, a being with a human body and a bird's head, stares out across the ocean. These are not the neat, regimented lines of a scribe's work. They are bold, singular statements etched into the living rock of the island itself. This visual echo forces a critical question. Are we looking at the same language in two different dialects, one for wood and one for stone, or at something else entirely? The petroglyphs and the Rongorongo tablets exist in two separate worlds of communication. The rock carvings are inherently public and anchored to place. They are located at Orongo, the center of the volatile birdman cult, where rival clans competed each year in a deadly race to retrieve the first sooty tern egg. The carvings are declarations of power, devotion, and identity, meant to be seen by all who came to that sacred site. They are monumental art, a form of spiritual and political broadcasting. The wooden tablets, in stark contrast, were intensely private and portable. They were tapu, forbidden to most, handled only by the priestly elite. Their function was not to broadcast to a crowd, but to preserve precise, complex information for a select few. The medium reflects this perfectly. Wood is rare, precious, and can be stored, hidden, or carried. Stone is permanent, immovable, and communal. So while a birdman petroglyph might proclaim a clan's connection to the god Make, a sequence of bird glyphs on a tablet could be recording the exact lineage of every birdman competition winner for the past 200 years. One is the billboard, the other is the secret archive. This distinction leads us to the core of the comparison. Look closely at the symbols themselves. The visual family resemblance is undeniable. The crouching human figures, the frigate birds, the geometric patterns, they all share a common artistic DNA. This suggests a unified symbolic vocabulary that permeated Rapanui culture, from the most public ritual to the most esoteric knowledge, but the execution and arrangement are worlds apart. The petroglyphs are individual, powerful icons. They are often carved in isolation or in loose groupings, not in tight, linear sequences. The Rongorongo glyphs are tiny, standardized, and bound by the strict rules of reverse boustrophedon. This is the crucial difference. It is the difference between using an alphabet to write a novel and using those same letters to create a company logo. The logo uses the symbols, but not in a way that conveys sequential language. So, is Rongorongo a refined, formal script that evolved out of this broader symbolic tradition? It is a compelling possibility. Perhaps the island's scholars took the powerful, shared symbols of their culture and systematized them, adding grammatical markers and syntactic rules to create a true writing system for record-keeping. The petroglyphs would then represent the popular, symbolic root, while the tablets represent the elite, linguistic flower that grew from it. Yet there is another, equally fascinating possibility. What if the relationship is not evolutionary but parallel? The two systems may have coexisted, serving completely different purposes with the same visual toolbox. The priests needed a way to record chants, calendars, and genealogies with precision. The larger society needed a way to mark sacred spaces, commemorate events, and express identity in a lasting way. Both groups drew from the same deep well of cultural imagery, but they applied it to different problems. The birdman on the rock face is an emblem. The sequence of bird glyphs on the tablet might be a verb, a name, or a date. They are cousins, not parent and child. This duality adds a profound layer to the mystery of decipherment. If a researcher successfully translates a Rongorongo glyph as frigatebird, does that help us understand the birdman petroglyph? Only partially. The petroglyph carries layers of ritual, competitive, and spiritual meaning that the written word alone may not capture. Conversely, understanding the cult of the birdman gives us context for why the frigatebird glyph was so important, but it does not tell us how that glyph functioned in a sentence about lunar cycles or royal ancestry. The stone speaks in proclamations, the wood whispers in paragraphs. To hear the full story of Easter Island, we must learn to listen to both voices, understanding that they are part of a single, complex conversation between the sacred and the secret, the public and the profound, carved into the very soul of the island. The shift from carving moai to electing a birdman marks one of history's great cultural pivots. After the age of the giant statues, a new and desperate form of spiritual leadership emerged on Rapanui. This was the Tangata Manu, the birdman cult, and its annual ritual was as breathtaking as it was brutal. Each spring, champions from the island's competing clans would gather at the sacred village of Orongo, perched on the rim of the Rongorongo volcano. Their goal was not to carve stone but to claim a fragile prize. They would wait, watching the skies over the offshore islet of Motu Nui. The moment the first sooty-tern egg of the season was spotted, the competition began. The chosen warriors, or hapu, would scramble down the 300-meter cliff face, plunge into shark-infested waters, and swim over a mile of open ocean through powerful currents to reach the rocky islet. The first to find an egg, secure it in a special headband, and swim back to present it to his chief at Orongo won not for himself but for his patron. That patron, the chief, would then be declared the Tangata Manu, the birdman, for the coming year. He would live in ritual seclusion, considered a sacred embodiment of the creator god Makemake. This was not just a sport, it was a high-stakes, deadly method of transferring political and spiritual power without constant warfare, a physical and spiritual trial that decided the island's fate. The energy of this ritual must have demanded a written counterpart. While the petroglyphs at Orongo publicly celebrated the cult symbols, the portable, secret nature of the Rongorongo tablets fits perfectly with its ceremonial needs. Smaller tablets, easily carried or stored by a priest, could have served as essential ritual texts. Imagine a priest, perhaps the advisor to a competing chief, consulting a wooden tablet before the race. Its glyphs might outline a specific prayer or chant to Makemake and the ancestral spirits, a plea for protection and success for his clan's hapu. Another tablet could be a meticulous record, a sacred ledger listing the names of each year's winning chief and his champion, tracing the lineage of divine favor back through generations. This is where the most common glyph in the entire Rongorongo system becomes electrifyingly relevant. The frigate bird is everywhere. Its elegant, hooked beak and forked tail are instantly recognizable. In the context of the birdman cult, this symbol transforms from a simple pictogram into a potential powerhouse of meaning. On a ritual tablet, the frigate bird glyph might not just mean bird. It could be a logogram representing the god Make himself, who was closely associated with seabirds. It could stand for the title Tangata Monu. Or, in a sequence, it might be part of a verb describing the act of the ritual voyage or the moment of claiming the egg. A single line of glyphs beginning with the frigate bird could be the opening invocation of a ceremonial chant, something a priest would recite to sanctify the competition. The possibility that we are holding prayers and victory records from this intense annual drama changes how we see these silent pieces of wood. They are not abstract histories. They could be the very scripts of a living, breathing, and perilous ritual, the backstage notes to a performance where the stakes were life, death, and a year of divine rule. To decipher them would be to overhear the whispers in the sacred house at Orongo, the last instructions given before a man dove into the crashing surf, carrying the hopes of his entire clan on a desperate swim toward a single, fragile egg. The very act of saving the tablets has often threatened to destroy them. After being taken from the humid, stable climate of Easter Island, these sacred wooden objects entered a world for which they were never made. In the damp storage rooms of 19th-century museums or the dry, heated halls of European institutions, the wood reacted violently. It cracked, it warped. Curators with the best intentions sometimes applied varnishes or shellacs they thought would protect the surface, only to seal in moisture or create a hard, obscuring glaze that made the fine glyphs even harder to read. Each journey across an ocean, each shift from a tropical to a temperate zone, was a shock to their delicate physical structure. For decades, preservation was a matter of luck as much as science, and the legacy of that era is a collection of artifacts bearing the scars of their own rescue. The Santiago Staff, that long scepter of history, is now split into two pieces. Other tablets show deep fissures running through lines of text, as if the very language itself is fracturing. This physical fragility mirrors the intellectual fragility of the script. With each new crack, a glyph could be lost, a sequence broken, making the puzzle even harder to solve. The wood that survived the collapse of its own civilization was now battling the climate of the world that discovered it. Modern conservators approach these tablets not as curiosities, but as patients in intensive care. The goal is no longer just to stop the damage, but to reverse it where possible and create a perfect environment for indefinite survival. Today, in museums from Rome to Santiago, the tablets reside in custom-made, climate-controlled cases. These are more than just glass boxes. They are micro-environments engineered to replicate the stable conditions the wood knew for centuries. Humidity is locked at a precise level to prevent further shrinking or swelling. Light, especially harmful ultraviolet rays, is filtered out. Temperature fluctuations are eliminated. The tablets rest on specially designed mounts that support them without stress, often allowing researchers to study both sides without ever touching the sacred surface. This is preservation as a form of deep respect, a silent promise to future generations that these last physical echoes will not fade away on our watch. The science is precise, but the sentiment is profound. We are holding a breath that has been held for centuries, and we dare not exhale. Yet, this careful stewardship exists within a painful geographical irony. The tablets are safer than they have ever been, but they are also farther from home than they have ever been. The Rongorongo script, the written soul of Rapanui, does not reside on Rapanui. Its physical remnants are scattered across the globe, treasures in the vaults of museums in London, Washington, D.C., Berlin, and the Vatican. This raises one of the most difficult questions in modern archaeology: who truly holds the legacy of this script? The concept of cultural patrimony argues that these artifacts are an inseparable part of the living heritage of the Rapanui people. They were not freely given. They were collected during a time of immense vulnerability, often traded for trinkets or taken without full understanding. For the Rapanui today, the absence of the kohau Rongorongo is a physical symbol of a deeper cultural amputation. Their ancestors' voices are locked away in foreign institutions, requiring a visa to visit. The reconnection to that heritage is not just symbolic. It is a powerful step in healing the historical trauma of population collapse, colonization, and lost knowledge. The movement to repatriate, to return the tablets to Easter Island, is gaining powerful momentum. It is not a simple demand, but a complex conversation with compelling arguments on all sides. Proponents ask a piercing question: can you truly understand the script if you remove it from the land that gave it meaning? The wind that shaped the trees, the volcanic rock of Orongo, the sound of the waves that the first scribes heard. These are not just background details. They are context, the very world the glyphs describe. Studying the tablets on the island could open new insights surrounded by the petroglyphs, the moai, and the living culture that descended from the scribes. For the Rapanui community, the return of even one tablet would be a spiritual homecoming, a reclamation of a stolen intellectual birthright. It would allow elders to sit with the objects, to perform ceremonies, to reintroduce them to the island's youth not as distant mysteries, but as tangible pieces of their own identity. Museum directors and researchers, however, voice legitimate concerns rooted in care and access. They point to the island's remote location and limited infrastructure. Could Rapa Nui provide the same level of cutting-edge, climate-controlled conservation as a world-class metropolitan museum? A catastrophic fire, a power outage, or even a significant humidity shift could damage an irreplaceable artifact in minutes. There is also the issue of scholarly access. If all tablets were centralized on one of the most isolated islands on Earth, would the international collaboration needed to crack the code become impossibly difficult? The current scattered distribution, while born from colonial practices, has ironically allowed a global network of experts to study different pieces simultaneously. The digital age offers a potential compromise. Through perfect three-dimensional scans and virtual reality, a tablet could be returned digitally to the island for educational and ceremonial purposes, while the physical object remains in a secure conservational environment. But a digital twin, no matter how perfect, is not the ancestor's handiwork. It is a ghost, not the body. The debate continues unresolved, a quiet tension between the imperative to preserve and the right to reclaim. It ensures that the story of Rongorongo is not locked in the past, but is a living, breathing, and ethically urgent conversation about who owns history and who gets to write its next chapter. The debate over where the tablets belong is not just about conservation or access. It is a debate about voice. For the Rapanui people, the silence of the wooden tablets is a historical wound, but their own voices today are strong, clear, and reclaiming that heritage on their own terms. In the community, you hear a profound shift. Rongorongo is no longer discussed solely as an academic puzzle to be solved by outsiders. It has been reclaimed as a living symbol of Rapanui identity and incredible resilience. As one elder might express in an interview, the glyphs are not dead marks. They are the fingerprints of our ancestors. We carry them in our blood. This is not a metaphor. It is a statement of cultural survival. After everything from the slave raids to the epidemics to the colonial pressures, the people and their unique language endured. The script, even unread, stands as a testament to that endurance, a physical proof of the sophisticated intellectual world that existed here long before European ships appeared on the horizon. This reclamation is most visible not in museum labs, but in the vibrant contemporary art of the island. Walk through the galleries and workshops of Hanga Roa today, and you will see the ancient glyphs reborn in stunning new forms. Master tattoo artists skillfully weave the frigatebird, the crouching Tangata Monu, and geometric patterns from the tablets into intricate skin stories, connecting wearers directly to ancestral motifs. Wood carvers, working in the same tradition as the original scribes but with modern tools, incorporate sequences of glyphs into sculptures, blending the old symbols with new narratives. Painters use the iconic shapes as central elements in vast canvases that speak to both the mythic past and the environmental present of the island. In these works, the glyphs are not arranged for linguistic decipherment. They are deployed as powerful cultural emblems, a visual language of belonging. An artist might explain that she uses the glyphs not because she can read them, but because they are ours. They are beautiful, they connect us to the land and to each other in a way that words sometimes cannot. This artistic revival highlights a crucial, evolving understanding of the script's meaning. For the global community, the primary question remains, what did these glyphs say? For many Rapanui, an equally powerful question is, what do these glyphs mean to us now? The answers are about continuity, pride, and the active shaping of identity. A cultural revivalist organizing language workshops for children might note that seeing the glyphs on a mural or a t-shirt sparks curiosity. It makes the children ask, what is that? And we can tell them, that is from here. That is yours. The script becomes a gateway to deeper conversations about history, language, and their place in the world. This contemporary meaning does not replace the historical mystery. It exists alongside it. It acknowledges that while the specific liturgical chants may be lost, the symbols themselves are being re-infused with new layers of significance, of survival, of artistic expression, and of a people defining their own narrative after centuries of having it defined for them. The journey of Rongorongo, therefore, splits into two parallel paths. One path leads into the past, a technical pursuit of decipherment fought with microscopes and algorithms, seeking to recover a lost text. The other path is firmly in the present, a cultural pursuit of revitalization, fought with chisels, ink, and community spirit, seeking to reclaim a living symbol. Both are acts of reverence. One listens intently for a whisper from the past. The other ensures there is a vibrant, listening culture here in the present to give that whisper a home, should it ever finally speak. This duality transforms the script from a relic of failure, a language that died, into a symbol of ongoing dialogue. The wood may be silent, but the people are not. And in their voices, in their art, and in their determined stewardship of their own story, the legacy of those who carved the Rongorongo is finding a new, powerful, and unmistakably alive form of expression. The struggle to hear a silent script is not unique to Easter Island. It is a human story repeated across millennia and continents. Scattered around the globe are other voices from the deep past, etched into clay, stone, and metal, waiting for a key that may never be found. Placing Rongorongo among these mysteries reveals it is not a lonely oddity, but part of a grand, unfinished conversation with our ancestors. Consider the Indus Valley script. Flourishing over 4,000 years ago in what is now Pakistan and northwest India, this civilization built planned cities with sophisticated drainage, yet their language vanished entirely. Their writing, found mainly on small stone seals, features elegant, stylized symbols of animals and abstract shapes, but with no Rosetta Stone and no clear descendant language to use as a guide, the script remains a profound silence. Scholars cannot even agree if it is a true language or a system of proto-writing, a debate that echoes directly in the Rongorongo discussion. Then there is Linear A, the script of the Minoan civilization on Crete. It was used for administrative records in palaces like Knossos around 1800 BC. E, we can actually read its successor, Linear B, which was deciphered in the 1950s and revealed an early form of Greek. But Linear A, which records the original Minoan language, uses similar-looking signs for completely different sounds and meanings. It is like having a solved codebook for a later version that only confuses the original. The language behind Linear A has no known relatives, leaving its beautiful tablets as ledgers of a lost economic world, all numbers and inventory lists without a story. Farther east in ancient Iran, the Proto-Elamite script presents a different kind of challenge, dating to around 3000 BCE. It is one of the world's earliest writing systems. It seems to be largely accounting, using numerical notations and signs for commodities like grain and livestock. The difficulty is its abstraction. The glyphs are so simplified and standardized that connecting them to any specific language is nearly impossible. It is a bureaucratic shorthand that became too efficient, losing the linguistic hooks later scribes would need to understand it. Each of these puzzles is difficult for its own reasons. The Indus script suffers from brevity and linguistic isolation. Linear A taunts us with a deciphered cousin that provides no answers. Proto-Elamite represents a system so purely practical it shed its connection to speech. Rongorongo fits into this family as the youngest and most tragically interrupted. Its barriers are not millennia but a handful of brutal years in the 1860s. It has the potential advantage of a known descendant language, modern Rapanui, and a rich cultural context that is still partially accessible. This global perspective is crucial. It tells us that decipherment is not a single act of genius but a slow, collaborative science. A statistical method developed for Linear A might be adapted to analyze Rongorongo's glyph frequencies. The patient sign-by-sign progress on Proto-Elamite reminds us that even understanding a single ledger entry is a monumental victory. The silence of these scripts is a collective echo, a reminder of how fragile our connection to the past truly is. When a breakthrough comes in one field, it sends a ripple of hope through all the others, proving that no door is permanently locked, just waiting for the right hand to find the hidden key. That global conversation between the past and present now turns to the very atoms of the tablets themselves. While linguists analyze symbols, archaeologists are interrogating the wood, using tools that read a story the carvers never intended to tell. The science begins with a simple, profound question. Where did this wood come from? The answer is written in isotopes, chemical signatures locked within the timber. By analyzing the ratios of different carbon and oxygen isotopes, scientists can compare the wood's chemical fingerprint to known samples from across the Pacific. This tells us if a tablet was carved from a local tree, like the scarce Toromiro, or from a piece of driftwood that had journeyed thousands of miles before washing ashore. This is more than just botany. It speaks to the sheer value of the medium. A tablet made from precious local wood suggests an object of immense inherent worth, perhaps commissioned by a high chief. A tablet made from driftwood, however, tells a story of breathtaking resourcefulness, of scribes transforming a gift from the ocean into a vessel for sacred knowledge. The wood's origin is the first chapter of every tablet's biography. Then comes the question of age, and here radiocarbon dating has delivered a shock that still reverberates through the research community. For decades, the assumption was straightforward. Rongorongo was a purely pre-contact invention, a creation of the classical Rapa Nui culture that built the moai, flourishing in isolation before European ships arrived in 1722. Carbon dating has upended that timeline. When researchers carefully sampled tiny slivers of wood from several tablets, the results were startling. Some tablets indeed date to a time well before European arrival. But others yielded dates that place their creation squarely in the 18th or even early 19th centuries, decades or more after the island had made contact with the outside world. This evidence is explosive. It forces a controversial and deeply challenging question onto the table. Could the Rongorongo script have been inspired by seeing European writing? The idea is known as the stimulus diffusion hypothesis. Picture the scene. A Rapanui man stands on the shore watching a European sailing vessel approach. Later, he is invited aboard. He sees the foreign sailors reading from their logbooks, making marks on paper that they can later speak aloud. He understands the powerful concept of visible speech. Returning to his people, he and other elite thinkers might have taken that revolutionary idea and applied it to their own rich tradition of symbolic carving and oral chant, systematizing it into a unique script to preserve their own knowledge against a changing world. Proponents of this view argue it solves a major puzzle. The invention of writing is exceedingly rare in human history, occurring independently only a handful of times. For a fully formed script to appear in total isolation on the planet's most remote island stretches probability. An external spark, they suggest, makes more sense. The opposition to this idea is fierce and emotionally charged. For many, especially within the Rapanui community, it feels like a new form of dismissal, a suggestion that their ancestors were not capable of such intellectual innovation on their own. They point to the sheer sophistication of the script, its reverse boustrophedon structure and standardized glyph set, which would have taken generations to develop, not a few decades after first contact. They argue the carbon dates are misleading. The wood itself could be older than the carving. A scribe might have used a centuries-old piece of seasoned driftwood in the 1800s. Or the dates could reflect a period of active use and recarving of older sacred tablets, not their initial creation. This debate is not merely academic. It cuts to the heart of how we view Rapa Nui genius. Is Rongorongo a testament to uninterrupted, independent innovation, a final flowering of a classical culture? Or is it a stunning act of adaptive creativity, a brilliant cultural synthesis born from the trauma of contact? The wood's silent atoms have ignited one of the hottest, most respectful, and most necessary fires in current research, proving that the story of these tablets is still being written, one scientific clue and one passionate interpretation at a time. The carbon dates whispering from the wood force us to reimagine the entire context of creation. We must weave this scientific thread back into the island's most debated human story, the Great Collapse. For decades, the dominant narrative of Easter Island was a stark ecological parable. A society, blinded by its own ambition, chops down every last tree to move its colossal stone statues. The forests vanish, the soil erodes, the society descends into warfare, cannibalism, and ruin, a self-inflicted catastrophe that left a barren landscape for Europeans to find. This story framed the Rapa Nui as the architects of their own doom. Modern archaeology has profoundly complicated that picture. Yes, deforestation was severe and likely complete. The giant palm forests were gone by around the year 1600, and yes, this triggered immense hardship, forcing a radical shift in how people lived, ate, and organized themselves. But this was not an overnight apocalypse. It was a long, grinding adaptation. The people did not vanish, they changed. They moved from a society focused on monolithic ancestor worship, the moe, to a new, more competitive spiritual system, the birdman cult. This was not the end of their culture, but its painful, resilient evolution. Now, layer the Rongorongo dates onto this timeline of transformation. If the script flourished in the 17th and 18th centuries, it did not emerge during the island's classical peak when the great statues were being raised. It appeared in the aftermath, in what scholars call the late period, a time of profound scarcity and social reordering. This timing is not a mark of diminishment, but of incredible intellectual ferment. Consider the circumstances. The old gods, literally anchored in stone, may have seemed to fail as the environment degraded. The priestly class, the keepers of oral knowledge, faced an existential threat. Their population was under strain. Their intricate chants, genealogies, and calendrical lore, passed down through generations by memory alone, were at risk of fading away in the struggle for daily survival. In this light, Rongorongo looks less like a celebration of power and more like a profound act of cultural preservation. The invention or formalization of a writing system could have been a direct, deliberate response to crisis. It was a technology of memory created when memory itself was in peril. The scribes, perhaps seeing their world contract, might have decided to fix their sacred knowledge in a permanent, portable form. They took the symbolic language already present in petroglyphs and systematized it, creating a tool to outlast the uncertainty of their age. This reframes every fragile tablet. They are not trophies from a golden age, but lifeboats. Each line of glyphs could be a desperate effort to salvage a creation chant, a navigational star chart, or a lineage before the last elder who knew it perished. The script becomes a monument not to what the Rapanui had, but to what they feared losing. It is a poignant testament to their determination to speak to the future, even as their present grew more difficult. This theory bridges the two great debates. It allows for the script to be a fully independent, sophisticated invention, born from internal genius, yet explains its apparent late flourish by tying it to a specific historical pressure. The ecological and social upheaval provided the urgent need. The enduring brilliance of the people provided the means, so we are left with a haunting, beautiful possibility. The world's most isolated writing system may be the direct literary output of a civilization's twilight, a whisper carved in wood as the lights were going out, not to mourn the darkness, but to ensure that a spark of their world could somehow, against all odds, travel through it. Deciphering these silent lines is far more than an academic trophy. It represents our last, best chance to hear a unique human mind thinking out loud. The Rongorongo script is not merely a collection of pretty symbols. It is a frozen moment of consciousness from a world that defined itself by the horizon. To crack this code would be to open a direct line to the priests of Orongo as they calculated a lunar eclipse, to the chants that welcomed the first sooty-tern egg, to the genealogies that connected a living chief to the great navigator Hatumata himself. We would gain access to their history written in their own words, not filtered through the journals of European visitors who saw them through a colonial lens. It would be the difference between reading a stranger's diary about a man and reading the man's own diary. One is a report, the other is a voice. This voice matters precisely because it was nearly extinguished. The near-total erasure of the Rapa Nui population in the 19th century makes their written record, if we can ever read it, a miraculous survivor. It would be an act of profound historical justice, a way to restore a measure of agency and narrative to a people who suffered catastrophic loss. Giving voice to that wooden library would be a form of repatriation more meaningful than any physical return, a restoration of intellectual sovereignty. Beyond the island's shores, the implications ripple across our understanding of human ingenuity. If Rongorongo is proven to be a true, independent invention of writing, it forces a rewrite of a very short list. True writing sprang up separately in Mesopotamia, China, Mesoamerica, and perhaps Egypt. Adding a fifth, isolated point of origin in the middle of the Pacific Ocean would dramatically expand our map of human intellectual possibility. It would tell us that the spark of creating visible speech could ignite even in the most remote conditions, a stunning testament to the universal human drive to record, to remember, and to speak across time. Conversely, if it represents a brilliant adaptation inspired by contact, it becomes a powerful story of cultural resilience and synthesis, showing how a society under pressure can take a foreign concept and make it utterly, uniquely their own. Either way, the script stands as a monumental achievement. To finally understand it would be to recover a lost chapter not just of Pacific history, but of the human story itself, a chapter written not on papyrus or clay, but on driftwood salvaged from an endless sea, a defiant act of memory against the vastest silence imaginable. The silent moai still stare from the shore, guardians of a secret they were never meant to tell. Our journey through the Rongorongo mystery has taken us from a bishop's study in Tahiti to the digital labs of Bologna, from the frantic birdman races at Orongo to the quiet conservation rooms of the Smithsonian. We have seen how a single piece of carved wood shattered the myth of a wordless culture, and how the very act of saving that knowledge may have sealed its meaning away forever. We have followed the numbers with Norazov, listened for chants with Fisher, and traced lunar cycles in the Mamari Tablet's glyphs. We have witnessed the painful debate over whether this script is a pre-contact triumph or a post-contact masterpiece of adaptation, and felt the powerful pull of the repatriation argument, a longing to bring ancestral voices home. Through every statistical analysis and every high-resolution scan, one truth remains. The glyphs do not speak, they whisper, and that whisper is what makes them so profoundly compelling. The enduring silence of Rongorongo is not a failure of scholarship. It is a testament to the breathtaking ingenuity of the human mind, capable of creating a system of meaning so intricate and so personal that it could, in the span of a few tragic years, become a locked vault. It speaks to our dual drive to shout our stories to the future and to hide our most sacred truths from the uninitiated. This wooden script is both a beacon and a shadow. So we leave you with the questions that now live in the grain of that ancient wood. What do you think? Is Rongorongo a true lost language, a complete literature waiting for its Rosetta Stone? Or is it an elaborate ritual code, a visual symphony meant only for the eyes of priests? Could that key still exist, a forgotten bilingual text waiting in a dusty archive or sealed in a dry island cave, holding the cipher to it all? Share your theories below, subscribe for more journeys into history's greatest enigmas, and remember, some of humanity's most monumental stories are written in stone, but the most elusive, the most intimate, and the most haunting are often written on wood.